First contact and assessment. Admiral Elara Morgan stood on the bridge of the UES Intrepid, her eyes fixed on the main display where 7 massive alien vessels arranged themselves in a perfect heptagon formation. Their hulls rippled with colors that shouldn't exist naturally, colors that shifted and pulsed like living things. The sensor officer kept adjusting frequencies, struggling to get consistent readings. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Hayes called from communications. We're receiving a transmission. Frequency unlike anything in our database. Morgan nodded. Put it through. The main screen flickered and resolved into an image that made several bridge officers flinch. The being appeared vaguely humanoid with elongated proportions, limbs too long, joints too numerous, and a face that seemed to constantly shift between expressions. Species assessment initiated, the alien stated, its voice resonating unnaturally through the speakers. Classification: human. Technology level: pre-ascension. Threat assessment. The beam paused, multiple eyes blinking in sequence. Minimal. Morgan stepped forward. This is Admiral Elara Morgan of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You have entered sovereign human territory. State your intentions. The alien's face rippled in what might have been amusement. Territorial claims noted and dismissed. I am Sovereign Tezix of the Corvan Dominion. We claim this system by right of superior capability. Dr. Naomi Chen, the fleet's chief science officer, was quietly recording the encounter at her station. She caught Morgan's eye and subtly tapped her tablet, indicating she was capturing all sensor data. We have no quarrel with your people, Morgan responded, keeping her voice steady. We welcome peaceful contact. Peace is inefficient, Tezix stated flatly. Your species has been observed for 63 of your years. Your potential is adequate. Your resistance would be inconsequential. Commander Rivera stepped closer to Morgan, whispering, Admiral, they're scanning our ships. They're focusing on our energy weapons, but seem to be dismissing the railgun systems. Morgan nodded almost imperceptibly. The military-grade electromagnetic mass accelerators, her pet project that many considered an expensive anachronism in an age of energy weapons, was being overlooked by the aliens. Your species will be incorporated into the Dominion, Tezix continued. Prepare your governance structures to receive our representatives. You have 72 hours to arrange proper reception protocols. Resistance is. The transmission cut abruptly as the alien vessels simultaneously shifted position. New contacts. Lieutenant Park shouted from tactical, multiple signatures approaching from the outer system. They're not ours, Admiral. The view screen shifted to show 15 new vessels appearing from what looked like tiers in space itself. These ships were angular, bristling with visible weapons emplacements. It seems, Morgan said quietly, that we're not the only ones being assessed today. She turned to Commander Rivera. Signal the fleet to fall back to defensive position, Gamma 3, and get me a direct line to Earth High Command. Tell them we're about to be caught in someone else's war. The Security Council chamber fell silent as the holographic display showed Corvan ships entering orbit around Mars, Venus, and Earth itself. Defense Minister Collins's face had gone ashen. This isn't an invasion, he whispered. It's encirclement. While we debated, they positioned themselves around every major population center in the system. The second alien fleet, General Zhao asked. Morgan shook her head. Gone. They exchanged what appeared to be recognition signals with the Corvans, then departed through the same spatial anomalies they arrived in. She paused. Apparently, we weren't worth fighting over. Secretary General Okafor raised her hand. Admiral Morgan, you've reviewed the Corvan demands. In your professional assessment, do we have any military options? Before Morgan could respond, Collins slammed his fist on the table. There are no options. Their technology is centuries beyond ours. Did you not see what happened to Proxima Colony? 3 minutes after they refused Corvan landing rights, the entire settlement was reduced to atomic particles. Morgan activated her tablet, displaying the recorded sensor data from Dr. Chen. With respect, Minister, I believe there's something we're missing. The Corvin shields operate on principles we've never encountered, but they follow patterns, quantum resonance patterns. Patterns won't save Earth from obliteration. Collins snapped. 10,000 lives on Proxima against 9 billion on Earth. Secretary General Okafor said quietly. We must consider accepting their terms. Morgan's tablet pinged with a message from her son. Marcus. Situation deteriorating on lunar base. Corvins demanding access to quantum computer core. Security forces outnumbered. Mom, please tell me you have something. Morgan looked up at the civilian leaders of Earth, terrified and ready to capitulate. She thought of the countless worlds that had already fallen, of the billions who now lived under Corvin rule. I request 24 hours, she said firmly. Give me 24 hours to explore a defensive option before we formally respond. Collins laughed bitterly. To do what? Compose a particularly strongly worded surrender document. To test a theory, Morgan replied, meeting his gaze steadily. A theory about their shield technology and its potential vulnerabilities. Secretary General Okafor studied Morgan's face. You truly believe you found something? I believe it's worth 24 hours to determine if humanity surrenders everything or fights with a chance. After a tense silence, Okafor nodded. You have 12 hours, Admiral. Not a minute more. Morgan stood, gathering her materials. I'll take it, and I'll need full operational control of the Artemis battle group. Absolutely not. Collins protested. You want us to entrust what remains of our Space Force to your hunch. Morgan's expression hardened. No, Minister. I want you to entrust it to the only flag officer who isn't ready to surrender humanity without firing a single shot. The room fell silent again. Okafor looked around the table, then nodded slowly. Granted, Admiral. 12 hours. As Morgan left the chamber, Commander Rivera fell into step beside her. 12 hours isn't enough time to develop and test a countermeasure, he said under his breath. It is if Dr. Chen has been working on one since first contact, Morgan replied, quickening her pace, and if the Artemis and Perseus captains are willing to follow orders that might end their careers or save humanity. Rivera's expression remained grim. Get me a secure channel to lunar base, Morgan ordered. I need to speak with my son. As they hurried toward the shuttle bay, Morgan glanced out a viewport at the Corvin vessel hovering over Geneva, a massive crystalline structure that seemed to bend the very light around it. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. 12 hours to find a weakness in what appeared to be perfect defense technology. 12 hours to justify her defiance of civilian authority. 12 hours to prepare an act that would either save humanity or condemn it. The desperate gambit. So you're saying their shields are basically perfect against energy weapons? Morgan asked, rubbing her temples as she tried to process the quantum mechanics Chen was explaining. Not perfect, Chen corrected, brushing a lock of hair from her face. The chief science officer hadn't slept in 30 hours, sustained by military-grade stimulants and sheer determination. Quantum optimized. The Corvins have engineered their defenses to counter the weapons they expect us to use. Lieutenant Torres, a junior engineer who had been silently working at a terminal, spoke up. It's like they developed an immune system against the diseases they've encountered, but they've never encountered Earth's particular strain of obstinacy. Morgan finished, a thin smile forming. Show me the simulations again. Chen nodded to Torres, who activated a holographic display. It showed a Corvin vessel surrounded by its iridescent shield barrier. Energy weapons, lasers, plasma bolts, particle beams struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly, their energy absorbed and redirected. Now the kinetic impact scenario, Morgan ordered. The simulation shifted. A tungsten rod accelerated by a railgun approached the Corvin shield. As it made contact, the shield flickered, attempting to respond, but the rod passed through with only minimal loss of velocity, striking the hull beneath. The math checks out, Torres said. Their shields operate on quantum field principles that specifically counter electromagnetic energy weapons. Physical objects moving at relativistic speeds don't trigger the same defense response. It's not that they can't stop physical objects, Chen added quickly. It's that their shields are optimized for efficiency. Why waste energy stopping primitive projectiles when no advanced civilization would use them? Morgan paced the small lab space. Their arrogance is their vulnerability. The door slid open and Commander Rivera entered. Admiral, we've received word from Earth. The Security Council is reconvening in 60 minutes. They're expected to accept the Corvin terms. And lunar base? Morgan asked, tension evident in her voice. Rivera's expression tightened. Corvin vessels have landed at 3 major facilities. They're collecting human specialists. Your son's facility is next on their list. Morgan nodded, absorbing the information. She turned back to the simulation. If this works, how many ships would we need? 3 minimum, Chen replied, each firing from a different vector to prevent the shields from adapting. The timing would need to be precise, microsynchronization. Can we do that without being detected? Rivera asked. Torres spoke up again. The Corvins monitor for energy weapon signatures and drag emissions. Railguns are effectively invisible until fired. They're just magnetic coils until they discharge. Morgan studied the tactical display showing Corvin positions throughout the solar system. One vessel in particular caught her attention, larger than the others, positioned in high Earth orbit. Their command ship, she said softly. If we were to demonstrate our capability against their flagship, a decapitation strike. But Admiral, Rivera finished, even if this works, it's 1 ship out of hundreds. It's not about destroying their fleet, Morgan replied, her eyes never leaving the display. It's about changing the equation. No species has ever successfully penetrated Corvin defenses. We do that once, the entire galaxy will take notice. Her tablet chimed with an incoming transmission. Marcus's face appeared, his expression tight with fear. Mom, they're moving on the central facility. Security is evacuating civilians to the subsurface levels, but it won't hold them long. Morgan's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the tablet. Hold position, Marcus. I'm implementing a response strategy. After the call ended, Morgan turned to her officers. Prep the Intrepid, Artemis, and Perseus for combat maneuvers. Transmit Dr. Chen's firing solutions to each ship. Authorization code Morgan Delta 9 Echo. Rivera stiffened. Admiral, without Security Council approval. The Security Council is preparing to surrender humanity to servitude. Morgan cut him off. I'm choosing a different path. She looked at each of them in turn. Chen, Torres, Rivera, seeing the weight of her decision reflected in their eyes. What I'm ordering borders on treason in peacetime. But make no mistake, we are at war, whether Earth's governments acknowledge it or not. I won't order anyone to follow me into this. Each of you has a choice to make. The lab fell silent after Morgan's declaration. She watched the emotions play across each officer's face. Fear, doubt, resolve. Lieutenant Torres spoke first. My sister lives in New Sydney. The Corvins have already established a processing center there. She straightened. I'm with you, Admiral. One by one, the officers affirmed their commitment. Rivera was the last, his face a mask of professional detachment that didn't quite hide his conflict. The oath we took was to protect Earth and her colonies, he said finally, not her politicians. I'm with you. Morgan nodded once, sharply. Set course for Saturn's shadow. We rendezvous with Artemis and Perseus in 30 minutes. As the Intrepid broke formation from the rest of the Earth fleet, warning signals flashed across tactical displays. Earth Command is ordering us to return to position. Communications reported. Acknowledge receipt of message, Morgan replied. No response necessary. The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence as the 3 ships positioned themselves behind Saturn's bulk, hidden from both Earth and the Corvin fleet. On the tactical display, Morgan watched as the Corvin command ship adjusted its orbit, responding to her request for a meeting. "They're taking the bait," Rivera observed quietly. "Arrogance," Morgan replied. "They don't believe we're capable of threatening them." Dr. Chen entered the bridge carrying a tablet displaying real-time calculations. Final targeting solutions uploaded to all 3 ships. The synchronization is set. We'll have a 5-microsecond window where all 3 projectiles impact simultaneously. "And if we miss that window?" Morgan asked. "The Corvin shields will adapt after the first impact. Subsequent shots will be ineffective." Morgan turned to the weapons officer, Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Status of railgun systems." "Primary and secondary railgun systems charged to 100%, Admiral." "Targeting solutions locked. Firing circuits primed and ready." "Put me through to all 3 ships." When the channel opened, Morgan took a moment to study the faces of Captain Nagy of the Artemis and Captain Pierce of the Perseus on the split screen. Both showed the same determination she felt. "Captains, what we do in the next 5 minutes will either save humanity or doom it. Either way, history will remember that we acted when others would not." Morgan's voice remained steady. "Synchronized firing solutions on my mark." "Artemis standing by." Nagy acknowledged. "Perseus ready," Pierce confirmed. Morgan checked the tactical display one last time. The Corvin command ship had reached the perfect position, just where their calculations predicted maximum vulnerability in the shield harmonics. "Opening channel to Corvin command ship," communications announce. Sovereign Tezix appeared on screen, its multifaceted eyes regarding Morgan with what might have been amusement. "Admiral Morgan, your governing body has nearly reached the sensible conclusion. Why do you delay the inevitable?" Morgan met the alien gaze unflinchingly. "I wanted to understand something, Sovereign. In all your conquests, has any species ever truly surprised you?" The Sovereign's facial structure shifted in what might have been the equivalent of a smile. "No, Admiral. That is why we are the Dominion, and you are soon to be our subjects." Morgan nodded almost imperceptibly to her weapons officer. "Perhaps today will be different." She cut the transmission, leaving the Sovereign's puzzled expression frozen on screen for a moment before it disappeared. "All ships," Morgan commanded, her voice ringing through the quiet bridge. "Execute Railgun Protocol Alpha now." The first strike. 3 massive electromagnetic accelerators discharged simultaneously. The tungsten rods, each massing half a ton and accelerated to 15 kilometers per second, crossed the void between Saturn and Earth orbit in minutes. On the view screen, Morgan watched as the 3 projectiles, nearly invisible at their velocity, struck the Corvin command ship. There was no explosion, no dramatic burst of energy. One moment the massive alien vessel was intact, the next it had 3 perfectly cylindrical holes puncturing it from different angles. Atmosphere and debris venting silently into space. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. "Multiple Corvin vessels altering course," Rivera reported, his voice tight with tension. "They're converging on our position." "Admiral." Communications called, her voice rising with urgency. "I'm detecting 20. No, 30 new spatial anomalies forming. Corvin reinforcements incoming." Morgan's tablet lit up with a priority alert from Lunar Base. The message contained only 2 words from Marcus. "They're retreating." "Evasive maneuvers. Pattern Sierra 3. Morgan ordered as the Intrepid shuddered under enemy fire. "Target nearest Corvin vessel. Adjust railgun harmonics according to Chen's calculations." The bridge blazed with warning lights as damage reports flooded in from all sections. On the main view screen, the Perseus took a direct hit that sheared away its port section in a silent explosion of venting atmosphere and debris. "Perseus reports critical damage," communications called out, her voice strained. "Captain Pierce is evacuating to emergency sections but still operational." "Railgun status," Morgan demanded. Lieutenant Rodriguez's fingers flew across his console. "Primary railgun offline. Secondary charging at 78%. Targeting solutions recalibrating." Dr. Chen burst onto the bridge, her uniform singed, and a gash across her forehead. Admiral, the Corvins are adapting faster than we predicted. Their shield harmonics are shifting in non-standard patterns now. Another blast rocked the ship, throwing Chen against a bulkhead. Rivera helped her to a station as Morgan studied the tactical display. The Corvin vessels were no longer advancing recklessly. Instead, they'd maintained distance, firing from beyond effective railgun range. "They're respecting us now," Morgan observed grimly. "They know we can hurt them." "Respect won't save Earth if we're destroyed," Rivera countered. "We need to regroup." Morgan's mind raced through options, each worse than the last. Then her gaze fixed on the tactical display showing Lunar Base. The Corvin vessels there had altered their configuration, focusing inward on the human facilities rather than outward on defense. "They're vulnerable," she whispered, then louder. "Commander, signal the Artemis. Captain Naji is to disengage and make full speed for Lunar Base." Rivera stared at her. "Admiral, splitting our forces is exactly what they won't expect," Morgan finished. "Most of their fleet is focused here. The Lunar Occupation Force isn't prepared for armed resistance." She turned to Dr. Chen. "How quickly can you adapt the portable mining accelerators in Lunar Base's facilities to serve as makeshift railguns?" Chen's eyes widened in understanding. "With the right modifications and someone who understands the equipment. Hours, not days. My son knows those systems better than anyone," Morgan said. "He helped design them." Morgan turned to communications. "Lieutenant, get me Captain Naji on a secure channel." When Naji's face appeared on screen, smoke was visible in the background of her bridge. "Admiral, we're maintaining position, but our drive section took damage in that last exchange." "Can you make it to Lunar Base?" Morgan asked. Naji conferred briefly with someone off-screen. "Affirmative, but it'll be a one-way trip until repairs can be made." "I'm sending you Dr. Chen's specifications for converting mining equipment into weaponry," Morgan said. "Find my son, Marcus Morgan. He'll know how to implement them." Understanding dawned on Naji's face. "A second front." "Exactly. While we keep the main fleet occupied, you arm the civilians on Lunar Base. Hit the Corvins from where they least expect resistance." As the Artemis disengaged, the intrepid and damaged Perseus adjusted position to cover its escape, drawing intense fire from the Corvin fleet. Perseus reports railgun systems offline. Communications announced tensely. "They're down to maneuvering thrusters only." Morgan gripped the command console. "Tell Captain Pierce to withdraw to Titan's shadow. We'll cover her retreat." The Intrepid surged forward, its remaining railgun firing a precise shot that pierced the propulsion system of a Corvin cruiser, sending it spinning out of formation. "Admiral," Rivera said quietly beside her, "Earth Command is broadcasting surrender terms to all Corvin vessels." Morgan's expression hardened. "Irrelevant. The Corvins know now that surrender doesn't matter. We can hurt them." The ship rocked again as another hit struck the hull. Damage control alarms wailed across all decks. "Secondary railgun at 94%, Rodriguez reported. One shot remaining before cooldown cycle." Morgan studied the tactical display, gauging distances and trajectories. The Artemis was nearly clear of the combat zone, accelerating toward Lunar Base. The Perseus limped toward Titan's protective bulk. And directly ahead, the Corvin flagship, larger than the destroyed command ship, was coordinating the alien fleet's movements. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Morgan said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Plot a collision course with the Corvin flagship." The bridge fell silent for a heartbeat. "Target their bridge section with our final railgun shot," she continued. "Then full thrust into the breach we create." Rivera stared at her. "Admiral, that's..." "Sometimes," Morgan cut him off. "The most primitive solution is ramming a spear into your enemy's eye. Resistance ignites." The collision had left both vessels crippled but intact. The Intrepid's bow section had punched through the Corvin flagship's outer hull, locking the two ships together in a deadly embrace. Emergency force fields contained atmosphere in the human vessel's intact sections, but power fluctuated dangerously. Morgan regained consciousness to find her left arm pinned beneath a fallen support beam. The bridge was in ruins, bodies scattered across the deck. Commander Rivera pulled himself to her side, his face streaked with blood. "Status report," Morgan managed, her voice rasping. "Half the crew unaccounted for," Rivera replied, working to free her arm. "Engine core stable but offline. We're locked onto the Corvin vessel. They took it worse than we did. Boarding security teams are holding at junction points, but they're pushing hard. Dr. Chen is leading a team to the alien communication hub." Morgan nodded, wincing as her arm came free. "Any word from the Artemis?" "They reached lunar base. Captain Naji made contact with the resistance there. Your son is alive." Relief flooded through Morgan, but she kept her expression neutral. "And the Perseus?" Rivera hesitated. "Last report had them taking refuge in Titan's shadow. Corvin pursuit vessels broke off after our maneuver." A security officer appeared at the ruined bridge entrance. "Admiral, Dr. Chen requests your presence at the capture point. They've secured the alien communication hub." Morgan followed, moving through the Intrepid's twisted corridors until they reached the makeshift airlock where the two ships were fused together. Beyond it lay the alien vessel's interior, surfaces that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states, lighting that pulsed in patterns painful to human eyes. Dr. Chen stood before a crystalline structure that resembled a tree made of light. Her hands moved across its surface, interfacing with alien technology through a device of her own making. "We've accessed their communication network," Chen reported without looking up. "Most of it is incomprehensible, but we found navigational coordinates and recognition codes." "Can we contact the Artemis?" Morgan asked. "Better," Chen replied, finally turning. Her eyes shone with excitement despite her exhaustion. "We can contact the Cedrons." She gestured to the display where unfamiliar star charts glowed. "The Corvins keep detailed records of all subjugated species. The Cedrons are the closest, a star system only 12 light days from here. According to these records, their engineering capabilities were advanced enough that the Corvins conscripted them rather than simply harvesting their resources." "Conscripted for what?" Rivera asked. "Weapons research," Chen replied. "The Cedrons were developing experimental propulsion and defensive systems when the Corvins arrived. They were forced to adapt their research to serve the Dominion." Morgan studied the alien data. "Can we reach them without the Corvins intercepting?" "With the recognition codes I've extracted, yes. We can send a tight beam transmission that would appear to be routine Corvin communications." "Do it," Morgan ordered. "Send them footage of our railgun attack penetrating their shields. Show them it's possible to fight back." While Chen worked, Morgan's tablet flickered to life with an incoming transmission from Lunar Base. The signal was weak, breaking up, but Marcus's face was recognizable. "Mom," he said, his image distorting, "we received the specifications. The mining accelerators are being converted now. The Corvins don't understand what we're building. They think we're repairing equipment." "How soon until you're operational?" Morgan asked. "Hours, but we'll need a distraction when we activate. They'll respond immediately once they realize what's happening." "You'll have your distraction," Morgan promised. "Hold position." The transmission cut off as a violent tremor ran through both joined ships. Alarms blared through the Intrepid's remaining functional systems. "Corvin reinforcements," Rivera reported, checking a portable tactical display. "They're attempting to dock with their flagship to board us." Morgan turned to Chen. "Send that transmission to the Cedrons now, then set the communication hub to overload. We're abandoning this section." "What about the crew still fighting in the forward compartments?" Rivera asked. Morgan's expression was pained but resolute. "Send the evacuation order. Anyone who can make it to the escape pods has 5 minutes. We're separating the Intrepid from their vessel." Explosively. As they hurried back toward the human ship's intact sections, Chen's device chimed. "Admiral, we've received a response from the Cedron system." The message was brief, written in careful human standard. We have been waiting. We are not alone. Prepare for arrival. 3 days later, the command center on Lunar Base had once been an administrative office for the Helium-3 mining operation. Now it resembled a war room from centuries past, with physical maps and handwritten notes, nothing digital that the Corvins could monitor. Morgan stood before the assembled representatives of what the media had begun calling the Coalition. The Cedron assault on the Corvin outpost in the Ta Ceti system succeeded, she reported, pointing to a sector of the star chart. Their molecularly edged projectiles penetrated Corvin shields at half the velocity our initial railguns required. The Cedron engineer, Tyval, clicked his bifurcated mandibles in approval. His insectoid form towered over the humans, but his movements were delicate, precise. Our metallurgical refinements continue to advance. Each iteration improves penetration capabilities by 6.7%. The representatives of 5 other formerly subjugated species nodded or made their equivalent gestures. In the 2 weeks since first contact with the Cedrons, the rebellion had spread with stunning speed. Species that had lived under Corvin domination for generations found hope in humanity's simple innovation. Marcus approached the central table, his once civilian demeanor replaced by a soldier's bearing. The Corvins are changing tactics. They're consolidating forces around critical infrastructure rather than trying to maintain control of entire systems. A defensive posture, said Krell war leader Vex, her reptilian scales shifting color to indicate thought. They never expected to defend, only to conquer. Morgan studied the star chart, noting the movement patterns of Corvin forces. They're protecting something specific. Intelligence from captured vessels suggests they're preparing their doomsday weapon for deployment, Vex said grimly. The room fell silent. The existence of the planet killer was no longer theoretical. Intercepted communications confirmed the Corvins were activating a vessel capable of manipulating gravitational fields to crush planetary bodies. Its target will be Earth, Morgan continued. They believe destroying humanity's homeworld will break the rebellion spirit. The shield configuration on such a vessel would be exponentially more complex than anything we've encountered, Tevel observed. Multiple overlapping fields, each with independent generation systems. Even our refined railgun technology might not penetrate such defenses, Marcus added. Morgan turned to the Meridian representative, a translucent being whose gaseous form swirled within a containment suit. Ambassador Nix, your people's understanding of quantum field dynamics is unparalleled. What options do we have? The Meridian's voice emerged as modulated tones from their suit's translator. Single-point attacks will fail against such defenses. However, a synchronized multi-vector assault might create momentary harmonic interference patterns of vulnerability. For how long? Morgan asked. Microseconds at most. The calculations required would be challenging. Krell war leader Vex leaned forward. My ships are the fastest in the Coalition. We could deliver the strike force. And my people will provide the targeting calculations, Ambassador Nix offered. Morgan felt a moment of awe at how quickly these diverse species had begun working together, each contributing their unique strengths. The Corvins had ruled through division, ensuring their conquered species never communicated. That isolation had ended. Her tablet chimed with a priority alert. She read it, her expression darkening. The doomsday weapon has departed Corvin space, she announced. Estimated arrival at Earth in 5 days. The room erupted in urgent discussions. Morgan raised her hand for silence. We don't have the luxury of more planning. Each species represented here has contributed technology and knowledge to our cause. Now we must combine them into one coordinated assault. She activated the central holographic display, showing a massive vessel unlike any Corvin ship they'd encountered, a construct of dark metal and pulsing energy fields that seemed to bend space around it. This is our target. Its primary gravitational manipulation array is housed within a central chamber, protected by thousands of shield generators. No single weapon in our arsenal can penetrate its defenses. Morgan looked around the room, meeting the eyes or sensory organs of each representative. But together, with precisely coordinated strikes using the combined technologies of 7 species, we can create a momentary window of vulnerability. And who will deliver the killing blow? Vex asked. Morgan's gaze shifted to her son. We will. Humanity started this rebellion with a simple railgun. We'll finish it the same way. The Admiral's legacy. The massive coalition fleet gathered in the shadow of Neptune, hidden from Corvin long-range sensors. Ships of 7 different species, each designed according to radically different biological and engineering principles, arranged themselves in formation. At the center, the newly commissioned UES Defiance, built around the salvaged railgun technology from the Intrepid, waited for the signal to begin the assault. On the Defiance's bridge, Morgan stood beside her son, both now wearing the insignia of the Coalition Defense Force. The Corvin planet killer has crossed the heliopause, Marcus reported. Passive sensors detect multiple escort vessels in standard defensive formation. Morgan nodded. Send the go signal to all Coalition vessels. Execute Operation Thunderbolt. Across the fleet, engines flared to life as ships accelerated on carefully calculated vectors. The Krell attack cruisers, fastest in the fleet, surged ahead, their organic-looking hulls rippling as they pushed to relativistic speeds. The Meridian contingent, their crystalline vessels nearly invisible against the backdrop of space, moved into sensor jamming positions, their advanced quantum technology creating false readings that would confuse Corvin detection systems. Corvin escorts have detected the Krell Vanguard, Tactical reported. They're moving to intercept. Right on schedule, Morgan replied. Signal the Sedrons to execute Phase 2. The insectoid Sedron ships, biomechanical constructs of gleaming metal and chitin, emerged from concealment behind Jupiter's largest moons, cutting off the Corvin escort vessel's retreat path. On the main view screen, Morgan watched as the battle unfolded according to their meticulous plan. The Corvin escorts, suddenly faced with attacks from multiple vectors, split their formation, exactly as predicted by the Arteran strategic algorithms. The planet killer is adjusting course, Marcus said, accelerating toward Earth. They're trying to complete their mission before we can stop them. Signal the Meridians to begin shield disruption sequence, Morgan ordered. In the void between the combatants, the Meridian vessels released swarms of quantum disruptors, devices that generated precisely tuned interference patterns designed to create momentary fluctuations in the planet killer's shield harmonics. Disruptors deployed and active, communications reported. Meridians report shield modulation beginning to fluctuate. Morgan activated the ship-wide comm. All hands, this is Admiral Morgan. In 5 minutes, we will engage the Corvin planet killer in what may be the most important battle in human history. Remember what we fight for, not just Earth, but freedom for all species under Corvin dominion. Stand ready at your stations. She turned to Marcus. Status of the primary railgun. Charged to 120% capacity, he replied. The Sedron modifications are holding. Tungsten vanadium penetrator loaded and ready. Morgan nodded, checking the tactical display one final time. The Coalition forces were now fully engaged with the Corvin escorts, drawing them away from the planet killer, which continued its relentless advance toward Earth. Signal from Ambassador Nix. Communications announced. The shield harmonic calculations are complete. Transom.